Knots Landing is an American primetime television soap opera that aired from December 27, 1979, to May 13, 1993, on CBS. A spin-off of Dallas, it was set in a fictitious coastal suburb of Los Angeles, and centered on the lives of four married couples living in a cul-de-sac, Seaview Circle. By the time of its conclusion, Knots Landing had become one of the longest-running prime-time dramas on U.S. television after Gunsmoke and Bonanza. Knots Landing was created by David Jacobs in conjunction with producer Michael Fileman. Although it became a spin-off of Dallas, the concept predates that series, and was initially rebuffed by CBS in 1977, as the network wanted something more saga-like. Jacobs then created Dallas, which the network accepted and premiered in 1978. After Dallas became a hit, Jacobs was then able to adapt Knots Landing as a spin-off series by way of incorporating characters originally introduced in the parent series. The series was largely inspired by a 1957 movie No Down Payment, but also by the 1973 Ingmar Bergman television miniseries Scenes from a Marriage. Storylines included rape, murder, kidnapping, assassinations, drug smuggling, corporate intrigue and criminal investigations. Though initially not as popular as Dallas, Knots Landing eventually outlasted it and garnered much critical acclaim. The series peaked during the 1983-84 season with a 20.8 rating and a 20.0 rating for the 1984-85 season. This can be attributed, in part, to more dramatic storylines as the series became more soap opera-like, and the gradual inclusion of newer characters to interact with the original cast. By the 1988-89 season, Knots Landing was ahead of Dallas in the ratings, though audiences for both shows by this time were less than their earlier years. There were 344 episodes and 14 seasons of Knots Landing from 1979 to 1993. In 1997, much of the cast reunited for a two-part miniseries entitled Knots Landing: Back to the Cul-de-Sac. In 2005, they reunited again for the non-fiction special Knots Landing Reunion Together Again, in which the cast reminisced about their time on the show. Dallas itself was revived in 2012, with characters from Knots Landing appearing in its second season. Background: Gary Ewing was the middle son, and the black sheep of the Ewing family from Dallas. Gary was an alcoholic, and his father Jock and older brother JR had never treated him as an equal. The insecure Gary met Valin when they were aged 17 and 15 years old respectively. They were married briefly and had a daughter, Lucy, but Gary left South Fork Ranch and later divorced Valin. With Gary gone from South Fork Ranch, JR had Valin followed and run out of town, as he took her daughter and manipulated Gary away from her. Years later, Valin and Lucy reconnected, causing Valin and Gary to reunite. They remarried and Gary's mother, Miss Ellie, bought the couple a house in California. Knots Landing is officially spun off from Dallas in the third season episode entitled Return Engagement. Credited cast: Michelle Lee as Karen Cooper Fairgate Mackenzie, first married to Sid Fairgate, and later to Mac Mackenzie, and the mother of Diana, Eric and Michael Fairgate. She and Mac later adopted Meg. Karen worked as a community activist and later proved herself to be a good businesswoman by running Knots Landing Motors and Lotus Point, of which she was a joint owner with Gary and Abby. Don Murray as William Sidney, Sid Fairgate, Karen's first husband, and the owner of Knots Landing Motors. Hard-working, fair and at times stubborn, Sid was killed when his car was sabotaged. Ted Shackelford as Garrison Arthur, Gary Ewing, the son of Jock and Ellie Ewing, first introduced in the TV series Dallas. Gary, the middle Ewing son between JR and Bobby, was the family black sheep and a recovering alcoholic. The true love of Valin's life and father of their daughter Lucy and twins Bobby and Betsy Ewing. After his arrival in California, he began working for Sid Fairgate at Knott's Landing Motors, where he was eventually promoted to vice president. He was later fired by Karen after Sid's death, and his marriage to Val was wrecked by his affair with Abby. After his father died, he inherited $10 million and later married Abby, though the marriage ended after a couple of years. After a relationship with the scheming Jill Bennett, he later remarried Valen. Joan Van Arker's Valen, Val, Clements Ewing Gibson Waleska Ewing. The true love of Gary's life, she is the mother of his 3 children, including Lucy Ewing of Dallas, and twins Bobby and Betsy Ewing, born in 1984. Valen originally came from Tennessee, and married Gary in the 1960s while they were still in their teens. But she was outcast from the Ewing family by Jr. After she and Gary remarried in 1979, they moved to Knott's Landing where she became Karen's neighbor and best friend. After their marriage failed again, she later married journalist Ben Gibson, and then psychotic Danny Waleska, before finally marrying Gary for the 3rd time. Constance McCashin as Laura Murphy Avery Sumner, the wife of Richard Avery, and later, Greg Sumner. Initially an oppressed housewife, she later became a successful real estate agent. Laura died in 1987 of a brain tumor. John Pleshette as Richard Avery, a lawyer, and later a restaurant owner. Unhappily married to Laura, he struggled to assert himself after she launched a successful career in real estate. In 1982, he suffered a nervous breakdown and left town in 1983. He took their 2 boys with him and he and Laura divorced. He returned briefly in 1987 to attend her funeral. James Houghton as Kenny Ward, a young record producer who, at first, cheated on his wife Ginger, but reformed upon the birth of their daughter Erin Malloy. Both he and Ginger moved away from Knott's Landing in 1983. Kim Langford as Ginger Ward. Married to Kenny, Ginger was a kindergarten teacher with aspirations of being a singer. She gave birth to a daughter, Erin Molly, in 1981. She later moved out of Knott's Landing to Nashville, Tennessee 2 years later with her husband and daughter to pursue a career as a country music singer. Patrick Peterson as Michael Fairgate. Sid and Karen's younger son who would become romantically involved with Mac's daughter Paige Matheson and later have an affair with his older brother Eric's wife, Linda Fairgate. Claudia Lonau as Diana Fairgate, Karen's daughter who fell in love with the sociopathic Chip Roberts. She eventually left Knott's Landing to study fashion designing in New York City. Julie Harris as Lily McClements, Valen's mother. Though they'd been estranged for many years, after Lily virtually abandoned Valen as a teenager in her quest to become a country music singer, Lily reappeared in Valen's life during Season 1. In Season 3, she moved in with Valen and Gary, remaining in Knott's Landing until Season 9. Donna Mills as Abby Fairgate Cunningham Ewing Sumner, Sid's younger sister, and the neighborhood troublemaker. After divorcing her first husband, Jeff Cunningham, Abby decided to visit her brother in Knott's Landing and intended to then move on to San Diego. However, Val persuaded Abby to stay in Los Angeles, and Abby began working as a bookkeeper at Knott's Landing Motors. Abby engaged in affairs with Richard, and later Gary, destroying his marriage to Val. Abby then married Gary herself, but they divorced a few years later, though by this time she was working with both Gary and her former sister-in-law, Karen, as joint owners of Lotus Point. She later married Greg Sumner, but the marriage lasted only a few months before Abby moved to Japan. Although Abby adored her brother Sid, Abby and Karen rarely got along. Donna Mills appeared in almost all the episodes of the series for her 9 seasons, with the exception of one episode during Season 10. She returned for the 2-part finale of the final season in 1993. Tonya Cruz Olivia Cunningham Dyer, Abby's rebellious daughter who became addicted to drugs. She was very close to both Fallon and Karen, much to Abby's displeasure. She later married mobster's nephew Harold Dyer against her mother's wishes, making Abby cut her off financially. Kevin Dobson as Marion Patrick Mac Mackenzie, Karen's second husband, an attorney who worked for the governor's office before opening his own private practice. He first met Karen when he worked as the federal prosecutor, helping to catch the men responsible for Sid's death. He later worked for his old classmate, Senator Greg Sumner, at his crime commission, though later quit because he could not tolerate Sumner's schemes, which led to the pair of them becoming rivals. Lisa Hartman as C.I.J.I. Dunn, Kathy Geary Rush. C.I.J.I. and Kathy were both singers. C.I.J.I. was murdered, leaving almost everyone in Knots Landing as a suspect. Some months later, C.G.'s doppelganger Kathy Geary showed up after being released from prison. Gary was interested in helping Kathy get a fresh start on life, even falling into a brief affair with her. But it was revealed she was hired by Abby to distract him. Despite this, they remained friends. She later married Lilima's son, Joshua Rush, who became abusive towards her. William Devane as Greg Sumner, Mac's ex-best friend and classmate who attended law school with him and offered him a job working for the Crime Commission. Initially a politician, Greg became a businessman after inheriting his father's corporation. He married Laura, with whom he had a daughter, Meg. After her death in 1987, he later married Abby, but had an on-off relationship with Paige, Mac's daughter. Douglas Sheehan as Ben Gibson, Fallon's second husband. He was a journalist, who later worked at Abby's television station but disappeared in South America. Alec Baldwin as Joshua Rush, Lilima's son whom she abandoned as a baby. He was raised by his preacher father and came to Knots Landing as a rather innocent young preacher. He later became a televangelist and married Kathy Geary, but became mentally ill and extremely violent. After he tried to kill Kathy, he accidentally fell off her roof and died. Terry Austin as Jill Bennett, an ex-colleague of Mac's and later had a relationship with Gary. She became threatened by Gary's close friendship with his ex-wife Fallon and tried to murder her. She accidentally killed herself after locking herself in the trunk of Gary's car in an attempt to frame him for kidnapping. Nicolette Sheridan as Paige Matheson, Mac's daughter with Ann Matheson. She became romantically involved with Karen's younger son Michael Fairgate, Peter Hollister, Greg's half-brother, and then Sumner himself. After she married Pierce Lawton, who showed himself to be mentally unstable as he tried to murder her. She also bedded police officer Tom Ryan for a while. By the end of the series, she and Greg had realized they were meant for one another. Michelle Phillips as Ann Matheson, Paige's mother and Mac's first love. She initially tried to split up Mac and Karen, but after failing she turned her attentions to Greg and also attempted to cheat Paige out of her inheritance from her grandfather. Larry Riley as Frank Williams. Frank moved to Knots Landing with his wife Pat and daughter Julie as part of the Witness Protection Program. He eventually took a job in Mac's law practice. Stacy Galena as Kate Whitaker, Claudia's daughter and Greg's niece, who resembled Greg's late daughter Mary Frances. She was a semi-professional tennis player, but broke her arm, which ended her budding career. She later became romantically involved with Gary Ewing. Kathleen Owen as Claudia Sumner Whitaker, Greg Sumner's sister, who moved to town under the guise of accompanying her daughter for college. In reality, she wanted to meddle in Greg's affairs. Other recurring characters: Steve Shaw as Eric Fairgate, Karen and Sid's eldest son, who had a brief romantic relationship with Greg Sumner's daughter Mary Frances before later marrying Linda, who would have an affair with his brother Michael. Bobby Jacoby as Brian Cunningham #1 and Brian Austin Green as Brian Cunningham #2. Abby's son, Stephen Macht as Joe Cooper, Karen's brother, Michael Sabatino as Chip Roberts, Diana's husband and the murderer of C.I.J.I. He died when he accidentally fell onto a pitchfork. Joanna Pettit as Detective Janet Baines, investigated CG's death and had feelings for her co-worker, Mac Mackenzie. Danielle Brisbois as Mary Frances Sumner No. 1 and Stacy Galena as Mary Frances Sumner No. 2. Greg Sumner's daughter. She is later murdered by a sniper in her father's work office. Lawrence Adden as Dr. Mitch Ackerman, the doctor that delivered Valens twins and then helped with the ruse that they had died. He later killed himself when confronted by Karen and Mac. Hunt Block as Peter Hollister, Jill Bennett's brother who was killed accidentally by his former fiancée Paige. Wendy Fulton as John Hackney, a malevolent associate from Ben Gibson's past. Joshua Devane as young Greg Sumner. Doug Savant as young Mac Mackenzie. La Park Lincoln as Linda Fairgate, Eric Fairgate's wife who had an affair with his brother Michael, and later on have a romantic relationship with her boss Greg Sumner. She was brutally murdered by Brian Johnston. Lynn Moody as Pat Williams, wife of Frank Williams and mother of Julie, a former doctor. She and her family were in the Witness Protection Program, but she died when she was hit by Danny Wales's car. Paul Carafotes as Harold Dyer, the nephew of a mobster who later became Olivia's husband. Peter Reckel as Johnny Rourke, singer and ex-lover of Paige Matheson. Kent Masters King as Julie Williams, teenage daughter of Frank and Pat Williams. Melinda Cully as Paula Vertisic, an environmentalist who became close to Mac and had an affair with Greg Sumner. Robert Desiderio as Ted Melcher, a consultant who worked with Abby and Greg Sumner but later plotted to kill Paige. Betsy Palmer as Aunt Virginia Guinea Bullock, Valens' aunt who comes to live with her for a while. Sam Behrens as Danny Waleska, Valens' violent and psychopathic third husband. Joseph Gian as Det. Tom Ryan, a dirty cop who almost married Paige. Lorenzo Catialanza as Nick Chalace. Dimitri Pappas, a shady-ish alien playboy who became involved with both Ann Matheson and Claudia Whitaker. Thomas Wilson Brown as Jason Lochner, a teenager with an abusive father who goes to live with Mac and Karen. Bruce Greenwood as Piers Lawton, a businessman who became involved with Paige but later tried to kill her. Felicity Waterman as Vanessa Hunt, an openly bisexual former tennis player from Britain, and a former tennis colleague and friend of Kate Whitaker. Notable guest stars: